Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
David sank into the couch, relaxing after another tiring day at work. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the TV filling the space with some random program. He glanced at the clock. Emily still hadn't shown up in the living room, which was strange, since she usually joined him around that time. When she finally came in, David noticed something was off. There was a certain heaviness in her gaze, as if she were about to say something she knew he wouldn't want to hear. She approached slowly, as though measuring each step, until she stopped near the couch and crossed her arms. "I need to tell you something," she began, hesitating. "On Friday, I'm going out to dinner with Michael, a coworker." David looked up from the remote, confused. Michael, he thought. He'd never heard that name before. The news caught him completely off guard. The casual way Emily announced it, like it was no big deal, only made it worse. "Dinner?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent, though he felt a pang of unease. "With a coworker?" "Yeah. We're working together on an important project, and he thought it'd be good to discuss some ideas outside the office," she said, not looking away, as if waiting for his reaction. David took a deep breath, fighting the emotions bubbling up. Jealousy and pride were lurking, ready to take over. But instead of showing how he felt, he opted for sarcasm, his usual armor whenever he felt vulnerable. "How interesting. Maybe I should invite Lisa to dinner, too, like a little coworker get-together." Emily frowned, surprised by his response. She hadn't expected that. "You're not serious, are you?" "And why not?" he shot back, keeping the ironic tone. "Apparently it's all the rage now, mixing work with dinner." The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily didn't say anything for a few seconds, she just stared at him with an unreadable expression. Then, with a sigh, she said calmly, "David, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's just work." He shook his head, letting out a soft laugh without a trace of humor. "Right. Just work." Emily sighed again, this time sounding tired, like she didn't want to drag out the argument. "I think I'm going to the bedroom. Good night, David." She left the room, leaving David alone with his thoughts. He stayed there for a moment, staring at the TV screen without actually seeing anything. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now he'd have to deal with it. Pride kept him from continuing the conversation, but his heart seemed to call out for answers. As the clock on the wall ticked away, David realized that waiting for Friday would be a long stretch filled with restlessness. Over the next few days, David felt trapped in a whirlwind of thoughts that gave him no peace. He tried to stick to his normal routine, but it was like a heavy cloud hovered over everything. The doubt, small at first, now took up every corner of his mind. He kept asking himself, who was Michael? Why did Emily seem so comfortable with the idea of having dinner with him? Why had he never heard that name before? At work, David tried to focus, but any quiet moment made his mind drift back to the same questions. Am I overreacting? He wondered, trying to convince himself it was just a work dinner. But the casual way Emily had mentioned it bothered him. She didn't ask for his input or open things up for a real conversation, she just stated it. That made him uneasy. Caught in that swirl of thoughts, David started to pay attention to Lisa, a coworker who'd always been friendly. Lisa was outgoing, always ready to help, and she and David often traded quick jokes during breaks. He'd never thought of her as anything other than a nice colleague, but now his mind wandered down paths he wasn't used to. What if I also had a friendship like that, he wondered, feeling a twinge of wounded pride pushing him in that direction. It was an uncomfortable thought, but at the same time, it seemed like a way to even things out. While Lisa explained something routine about a project, David found himself studying her face, her gestures, the way she smiled. He quickly looked away, feeling uneasy. He wasn't the kind of guy who went after revenge or used people to work out his own issues. But just the fact that he was considering those possibilities made him wonder how deeply the situation with Emily was affecting him. That evening, the tension between him and Emily was palpable when he got home. They talked only about practical things, bills, work, small daily tasks. David watched her when she wasn't looking, trying to figure out something in her gestures or expressions. Was she more distant, or was he just imagining it? Every detail felt loaded with meaning, her tone of voice, how long she spent on her phone, the way she avoided meeting his gaze for too long. David began imagining different scenarios. Maybe it really was just a work dinner, like she said. Maybe Michael was older, married, and not interested in her at all. But then again, what if he wasn't? What if Emily was hiding something? Uncertainty was cruel, eroding any hint of peace David tried to cling to. That night, lying in bed next to Emily, who was already asleep, David turned onto his side and stared at the ceiling. He listened to her steady breathing and felt a sharp pang of guilt. What if he was wrong? What if all these suspicions were just in his head? But the doubt wouldn't quit, like a voice whispering non-stop, "What if you're not wrong?" The days leading up to Friday felt endless. David noticed how the silence between them kept growing, like an invisible wall they both contributed to. Pride kept him from starting an honest conversation. He preferred to keep his questions to himself, while she acted like everything was normal. But nothing was normal, and they both knew it. Friday arrived with a heavy sense of inevitability, and David spent the day wrestling with the anxiety in his chest. He tried to distract himself with work, but the tension ate at him mercilessly. Every minute dragged, and the thought of what might happen made him restless. Deep down, he knew he wouldn't be able to just sit there while Emily went out to that dinner. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the need to understand what was really going on. Emily was ready before 7. David, sitting on the couch, watched her come downstairs. She'd chosen a simple but elegant outfit. Nothing showy, but enough to make him even more uncomfortable. He tried to hide the storm of emotions brewing inside him, but it was tough. Emily walked through the room, grabbed her purse, and, seeing him there, said, "Don't wait up. I might be late." The casual way she said it made David's blood boil. He wanted to say something, ask questions, demand explanations, but all he could do was give a slight nod. Emily left without looking back, and the door closed with a sharp thud that echoed through the quiet house. David stayed there, motionless for a few moments, then suddenly got up. He knew he couldn't just sit around. He wasn't the kind of man who accepted half-truths. Grabbing his car keys, he took a deep breath and decided he'd go after her. He wasn't proud of it, in fact, he felt a twinge of shame at letting it come to this. But his need for answers was stronger than the embarrassment. He drove carefully, trying to remember the restaurant Emily had casually mentioned a few days back. When he arrived, he parked on a nearby street and walked to the entrance. Peering inside, his heart raced when he saw her at a table by the window with Michael. David found a spot where he could watch them without being seen, but close enough to observe. He stood there, studying every move, every expression, every gesture, anything that might reveal what was really happening. Michael seemed ordinary, maybe a little younger than David, with nothing particularly striking about him. But just seeing him there with Emily made David uneasy. They both looked serious as they talked. Michael gestured a lot, while Emily seemed focused. There were no smiles, no secret glances, no touching that hinted at anything but a professional conversation. David tried to spot something that would confirm his suspicions, but everything left him confused. That's it, he thought. Was I really overreacting? As the minutes passed, guilt crept in. He didn't like hiding and spying. That wasn't who he was. But at the same time, he felt relieved he didn't see anything incriminating. Still, the doubt lingered. He couldn't tell if it was because he wanted to find something or if he was scared he might be wrong. After a while, Emily and Michael stood up. David froze for a second, unsure whether to remain where he was or leave. They walked toward the door, and he watched from a distance. Michael said goodbye politely, shaking Emily's hand before getting into a taxi. She stood there for a few seconds, checking her phone, then called a car for herself as well. David waited until she was out of sight before heading back to his car. On the way home, his mind was a jumble of conflicting thoughts. Part of him felt relieved he'd seen nothing more than a conversation about work. Another part was furious at himself for doubting her so much. Once he parked, he stayed in the car for a few minutes, trying to sort out his thoughts. He knew he'd have to face Emily eventually, but he still wasn't sure how. Walking into the house quietly, he placed his keys on the living room table and looked around, noticing her absence in a way he never had before. The doubt was still there, firmly rooted, now mixed with something he hadn't expected, guilt. Not just for following her, but for realizing how much things had changed between them without him knowing how or why. A while later, he heard the door unlocking. Emily came in, purse in hand and an almost tired, neutral look on her face. She noticed David on the couch, staring at the blank TV. She hesitated for a moment, then broke the silence. "You're still up?" David turned away from the TV to look at her. "I couldn't sleep," he said, not hiding the seriousness in his voice. Emily set her purse on the side table and stood there, watching his face. Something was different tonight. It wasn't just the usual tension of the last few days, it was deeper, heavier. "What happened?" she asked, crossing her arms as if bracing herself for a difficult talk. David took a deep breath, gathering his words before speaking. "I wanted to ask how dinner went." Emily frowned, surprised by his calm yet direct tone. "It was fine. We talked about the project. Nothing special." He nodded slowly, but kept his eyes locked on hers. "Emily, I need to be honest. These last few days have been hard. This whole thing," he paused, fighting the pride that wanted to stop him. "I've been thinking about so many things. Maybe I even imagine things that don't exist." She took a step closer, now more attentive. "What kind of things?" David hesitated, but knew he couldn't back down. "I went to the restaurant. I saw you and Michael." His confession lingered in the air like a bombshell. Emily froze, her face showing sheer disbelief. "You followed me?" she asked, stunned. "I didn't know what to think," he replied, raising his voice slightly, though he was still trying to keep control. "All of a sudden you say you're having dinner with some coworker I've never heard of. You didn't explain anything, didn't try to put me at ease. What did you expect me to do?" Emily shook her head, still taking it in. "I expected you to trust me, David. And how was I supposed to, when it felt like you were hiding something?" He stood from the couch, gesturing as he spoke. "I watched you two talking. It didn't look like anything special, but the fact I had to sneak around just to see for myself says a lot about where we are now." Emily took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. "You're right. I should have explained better. But do you want to know why I didn't? Because lately, no matter what I say, you're not really listening." David fell silent. Her words hit him like a punch. He knew she was telling the truth, but it was still hard to grasp fully. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice softer now. Emily stepped closer, letting her emotions show at last. "I've felt alone, David. For months. I needed someone to talk to about work, about what's bothering me, and Michael listened. That's it, he was just there to listen when I needed it. Not because he's special, but because I haven't felt I could count on you for that lately." Her words disarmed him. He stood there, trying to process everything. Even though it hurt to hear, he realized she was right. He had been lost in his own worries, unknowingly drifting away from her. She went on, her voice trembling a bit, "That dinner was about a promotion. I wanted something that would break the routine, that would make me feel appreciated again. But it was never about Michael. It was never about someone else. It was about us. David swallowed hard, feeling her words sink in. The pride that had led him this far started to fade, replaced by a painful understanding. He knew he had to respond somehow, but all he managed was, "I didn't know you felt that way." Emily looked at him, still hurt, but also relieved to have finally let it out. "Maybe you never asked." David stood there in the middle of the living room, looking at Emily as though he were really seeing her for the first time in months. Her words echoed in his mind, each one hitting a truth he hadn't wanted to admit but now realized he had to. The silence was dense, almost tangible, but it wasn't the silence of wounded pride or tension this time. It was the silence that comes when a deep wound finally gets exposed to light. "I never wanted you to feel that way," he said, breaking the silence in a low, almost whispery voice. "I swear I never realized." She looked at him, eyes still brimming with tears, but her stance firm. "That's the thing, David. You didn't realize. Not because you're a bad husband or because you don't love me, but because you've shut yourself off. And, honestly, so have I." He dropped his gaze, feeling the weight of her words. He couldn't deny it. Over the past few months, he'd gotten caught up in his job worries, the day-to-day grind, and maybe even his fear of seeing the signs that something was wrong. He'd assumed everything was fine because there hadn't been a big, obvious crisis, but now he saw the real danger came from small cracks slowly forming in what looked like a solid foundation. "When did things get like this?" he asked, not really expecting a straight answer. Emily shook her head and sat on the arm of the couch. "I don't know, David. It wasn't one specific moment. It was all the little things, you know? Things I should have said but didn't. Things you should have noticed but didn't." He moved closer, sitting on the couch next to her but leaving a little space between them, as if he still needed permission to break whatever invisible barrier stood between them. "I followed you because I was scared. Scared you were hiding something, that," he paused, picking his words carefully, "that I was losing you." Emily looked at him, her expression softening just a bit. "You're not going to lose me, David. Not over something like this. But if we keep going without talking or really listening to each other, we might lose ourselves." The idea of losing themselves echoed inside him. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. He knew he'd spent weeks, maybe months, avoiding serious conversations, refusing to face the idea that something could be wrong. But now that everything was out in the open, he couldn't ignore it. David exhaled deeply, facing his own shortcomings. "I followed you because I thought I'd find out something about you. But in the end, I think I learned more about myself." Emily raised her eyebrows, surprised by his candidness, and stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I realized that I've been so busy protecting myself, trying to seem strong, that I ended up pushing you away, not just you, but everything that matters. And when I saw you slipping away, even if it was only in my head, I panicked." "David," Emily began, but he stopped her with a small raise of his hand. "Let me finish. I need to say this." He paused, looking at her intensely. "I'm sorry, Emily. For not asking how you were doing, for not noticing what you needed. I should have done better, and I know I need to change." Emily took a long breath, taking in every word. It was rare for David to admit mistakes so openly, and that touched her more than she expected. But she also knew that words, no matter how sincere, needed to be followed by action. "I believe you, David. But it can't just change on one side. I made mistakes too. I closed myself off, and instead of trying to solve it, I looked for attention somewhere else. Not in a wrong way, but, in a way that drove me further from you." They sat there, side by side, admitting their failures and the weight of what they'd allowed to happen. It was a moment of vulnerability they hadn't shared in a long time, and even though it hurt, there was a sense of relief. The wound was in plain sight now, and finally, it could start to heal. David slowly reached over and touched her hand. Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she gently squeezed his fingers, as if to say, without words, that there was still hope. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.